Here's Jakob Nielsen's keynote speech from our UX conference in Las Vegas.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody for coming here and spending the first part of your evening on serious matters rather than the temptations, outside. So I want to talk about the dualities of user experience, by which I mean various ways in which there's not just one simple, clean answer, but rather multiple things to consider. And so by way of a little example of what I mean by dualities, we can look at these two paintings. So the painter went down to the ocean and painted, on the right you can see it's a sunny day, it's a calm, beautiful, inviting ocean. You really feel like taking one of those small boats out, right, and go for a little sail. On the other hand, on the left, you see dark, threatening clouds, high, dangerous waves, and you feel like letting those boats stay on the shore, and you're not going to take that little boat out in risk of anything. So, which of these two paintings is now the true painting of the ocean? And the answer, of course, is that that's not a reasonable question to ask, because both are true paintings of the ocean. Sometimes the ocean looks inviting and sunny and calm, and sometimes the ocean looks dark and scary and dangerous and high waves. Both are true, and that's what I mean by dualities. So to move to another art form, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, famous opening line from The Tale of Two Cities. And that applies to UX as well. I think maybe some of you have this feeling that, it's the worst of times when you struggle through something in your project or your company doesn't want to value UX the way we think it should be valued, or there are various other problems. I would actually say that based on my personal perspective, I think more so it's the best of times for UX, because relative to my time in the field, which is like 36 years, honestly, most of you guys don't even know how bad it was back then. But in the mainframe era, right? I mean, the interfaces were truly terrible. The respect or attention to user experience was not only zero, it was actually negative, in that companies thought that we shouldn't bother with this, right? People should be grateful they're allowed to use our precious computer, was the attitude at the time. And on the other hand, today, we probably have in many ways the best user interfaces we've ever had. This is not to say that they're perfect, or computers can or should not get better. It's just that it still is, historically anyway, I think, more so the best of times. But there's also that dark side of it's the worst of times quite often in pragmatic situations where you're trying to achieve something that would have high return on investment for the company, and yet they don't listen. So we do have those both of those situations being there. But let's not only think about the doom and gloom, but let's think also about, honestly, we have come a really long way. And I mean, I'm sure it's going much better, but still, we have come a long way. So this is maybe the most famous duality, UI versus UX. And there's so many, drawings, like meme-style pictures on the internet already of this. I'm not going to bother you with one more, but it is something that's very often, discussed. What's the difference or the distinction between UI and UX? Well, both are important. Is really my duality message here. The surface design, how what's on the screen. I mean, that's super important. It's not just a matter of it looks good. It's a matter of can people understand the buttons, the menus, the commands. I mean, that also is very important, the surface design. On the other hand, it's also very important with the deep design, the true total user experience. What are we doing for people, right? Both have to be good. So it does us no good to have a really great user interface. Even, let's say, have very high usability. People understand every possible feature on the screen, but yet it's a user interface to the wrong thing, to something that people don't want or don't need. Well, why have a wonderful user interface to the wrong thing? That's going to be a lost, failed product. It's not going to do any good. Well, on the other hand, let's say we have all the right features, the great deep design, we're solving a problem people really want to have solved, and we would do them a lot of good if only they could use these features. But the features are represented by cryptic commands and weird options and very convoluted, confused navigation system, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, people can't use the features. Well, okay, a feature that people can't use might as well not be in the product anyway. And so great features design, great deep design, terrible surface design might as well also not exist. So both have to, at the same time, be great. That's a true great example of duality. Well, another duality. Is UX important or not? Well, okay, we are at a conference that's called the UX conference, so we are maybe a little bit biased in our response to this question. We tend to sort of maybe think that UX is important, and I would certainly say yes, it is important. And we have a session on UX measurement and ROI, and return on investment can be really, really high for doing good UX work. We have so many cases where companies, vastly expand the business value of doing good design versus bad design. It is really important, really worth doing well, yes. On the other hand, is it actually the most important or the only important thing in the world or in a company? And the answer is clearly no. I mean, there are many other things that are important and often maybe even more important. And so as an analogy, let's think about something completely different, accounting. Okay, is accounting important or secondary? No, well, it's important. I mean, if you have bad accounting, you have no clue about how your cash flow is going. Well, one day you're going to wake up and you can't meet payroll. Not good, right? On the other hand, is accounting the most important thing in a company? Right? You have like complete control over every dime, but you have to have a good product, good marketing, good management, good variety, many other things for this company to be successful. So accounting cannot be said to be the only thing, or maybe even the most important thing, but it is important. UX, same thing. So what are we emphasizing or working on, or what's important for us as a discipline? Product or process? So by product, I mean the thing we're designing. By process, I mean how we go about designing it. And in my career, I've actually studied or worked on both of these two. So I'm going to show here two books I wrote. So on the left, we have Designing Web Usability. That was all about product. That book had a lot of guidelines for what makes for a good website or a bad website. It didn't say anything about how you make that website, just what it should be. So that was a true product focus, like this is how a good website is, or this is conversely like how a bad website is, so you don't do those things. Well, the book on the right, Usability Engineering, all about process, all about the systematic approach to improving usability, and it didn't talk at all about what you were designing. In fact, the book is kind of from before the web really took off, and yet all these methods described in the book, like user testing and heuristic evaluation, etc., all these methods are the exact ones we've applied since then to find out what makes for good or bad websites, and also even newer products, mobile stuff, watch-based computers, etc. The methodology, the process, applies to all these different products. So I would definitely say, and this is duality where we can truly say that both sides are really important and both of them need attention. So now I will first talk a little bit about that product aspect of UX, and then we'll turn later on to the process aspect. So my first duality is, do we even have a user interface? And there's a big trend actually towards zero user interface products. So various artificial intelligence products that work as agents, so you don't have to push any buttons or any commands. Computers that do things for you. And there's also voice-based interfaces which don't have visible user interface. I mean, they do have a user interface because you can speak a command and you listen to the response. And they have a lot of, by the way, usability issues because voice is an ephemeral media type. So as soon as I've spoken something, it's gone. As soon as the computer has responded, that's also gone. I can't kind of look at, I can look at an error message on a computer screen, or I can look at a set of icons and try to decide which ones to click on. So there's a lot of usability downside to these, but they also have certain various advantages as well. So that is a big trend towards reducing or even eliminating things you can click on and things you can read and things that the user should actively interact with. But at the same time, we have a converse or opposite tendency towards user interfaces everywhere, more and more user interfaces, as ever more products have a user interface in them. are computerized, software-driven. I mean, it used to be that user interface was for computer design, and originally mainframe design, and later on PC design, and later on mobile design, and mobile is just a PC in your pocket, so same basic thing. But now, like your toothbrush has a user interface and is on the internet, and your everything, your bathroom scale is on the internet and so forth. Everything is on the internet and online and Internet of Things, etc. And these things combine to form I would say a myriad of many, many, many user interfaces that the person has to deal with. At the same time, many of these devices have very bad user interfaces, partly because they don't have that big screen, which allows us to follow a lot of usability guidelines of giving people good feedback and such. And also partly because they're just, honestly, they're bad design. And could be designed better given their constraints, because they have not a lot of attention or knowledge about our UX process. Many of these people who, many engineers, I would say, who develop a lot of these products. But the worst scenario here, the worst consequence of this UI everywhere, is that the users now, again, this user experience we're talking about, so the users now have to deal with hundreds of things with user interfaces, as opposed to in the old day, one user interface. Now they have hundreds. And that means that they cannot devote brain power to understanding and learning so many different things. And so each little thing may only have a small amount of confusion or a small amount of that uncertainty of how I do what. But then you multiply that by 100. And it's not even just multiply, because these things have a combinatorial tendency to, it works here but doesn't work there, and how do you do this and that and the other? And so UI everywhere is really, I think, one of the problematic trends right now, but at the same time, of course, also an exciting trend, and certainly, if we want to be selfish, an opportunity for us. Are we emphasizing productivity? Well, that's for sure what we used to do. That has always been the core of UX, is to make it possible for people to basically accomplish their goals and their tasks. Whether it's an enterprise app and you can let's say run your payroll, or it's an e-commerce site and you can actually find and buy something and it's going to arrive in the next day. Those are all accomplishing, kind of real world related tasks with the computer. But there's also a tendency, and maybe more so in recent years than historically, but a tendency to time pass. And time pass is the word I kind of picked up from India, which means passing time. And so it's using the computer for its own sake, for entertainment or enjoyment or having a good time. So there are a lot of games, a lot of entertainment style applications, but also other things that people do just for the sake of time pass. The first analysis might be, well, that's frivolous, but I think actually, no. I think it's acceptable for people to want to have a good time and to not only have serious tasks on the computer, but also have the computer be, an important thing that it can enhance our quality of life. And it's really a distinction that goes back all the way to antiquity, to the ancient Greeks. They had these gods. Apollo, the serious god, he would drive the sun chariot across the sky every day like clockwork, very hard-working god. And on the other hand, you had Dionysus, the god of parties, wine, having a good time, always depicted, in slightly scandalous circumstances in the artwork from the time. The Greeks had those two gods, more than 2,000 years ago, and that shows it's a very deep thing in humanity that we have those two things that we both want to do. And I think similarly in UX, those are both two things that we should worry about and try to accomplish and work on. Methodologies might be slightly different for the two, but in terms of the product, there's both types of products that are great things for UX to work on. Then we have the question, duality, is UX doing good or doing bad? Well, I've been in this field for 36 years, and I would, of course, only do it if I thought it was doing some good. So I think that's the main part. And we can list a lot of things that UX is doing that's good, and the main one is maybe that our kind of main philosophy, I guess, is to make technology adapt to humans rather than let humans be subservient to technology, empower humanity to control our technology. That's our main goal. And then if you think more about our more immediate goal in specific projects, they would tend to be things like improve productivity, like I just mentioned, which is the only way anybody ever can get higher and higher salaries to produce more, because any company that pays people more than they produce, they're going to get out of business, right? So for people to basically kind of improve their standard of living, we've got to improve productivity. And today's world is really a knowledge economy, a cognitive economy, which means that the computer tools we're using are to a great extent the things that are holding us back from being able to produce more. And therefore, it's really our responsibility to enhance the world, drive the world economy forward to its next level. So that, I think, is one of the more pragmatic ways. Or we help companies sell more. We do it. All these things are actually for the better. But then there's that dark side as well, which again is more of a somewhat recent phenomenon as opposed to the deep historical roots in the field. But more recently anyway, there has been a bit of a tendency to, for example, design for addiction as opposed to design for engagement. And it's a fine line, because I think it's perfectly fine to say we'd like people to just spend a few more page views when they come to our website, read a few more articles. So that's not evil. I mean, I think actually honestly that's good, because you're hopefully providing something that people will like. But it can turn and become just addictive behavior, and where people are like wasting their time rather than enjoying their time, and they kind of get almost like depression as opposed to feeling an empowerment. And so that, I think, is that's that other side I'm referring to here. Or abuse of UX insights and guidelines. For example, when we do eye tracking, we know that there are certain parts of a web page that people don't tend to look at very much, and so you should use that guideline to put sort of less important information there that people only occasionally will need. But you could use that insight to put information there that you don't want people to realize or be aware of. And then you can always say, but if anybody complains, but we disclosed this clearly in this spot on the web page, and we show a screenshot, let's say in court or something. Well, it's obviously there, but pragmatically in the interaction scenario, people are not going to look there. And that's what I would call evil. It's kind of abuse of the insights we have from our studies to use them kind of against users rather than for users. Or even also our persuasive design guidelines. So for example, we have the scarcity principle. I think it is actually being abused by certain websites, when they say, well, we have only 3 left, only 2 left, actually. It ticks down, and you're putting the stress on people. Well, particularly if you just do it all the time, and there might actually be plenty of inventory left, but you're like trying to really trick people with this pressure. That's also, I think, kind of unethical use of that guideline. And I think it actually even also will backfire, because we actually know that when people encounter these type of persuasive methods too often and kind of like in a wrong, overly aggressive manner, they start to distrust that website. They don't believe that there's actually only 3 left, only 2 left. So it backfires if you're too evil. Okay, so now let me turn to talk about a few process-oriented issues. The first one is the qualitative versus quantitative distinction in usability processes. And we, of course, have both types of methods, and I would just encourage, say, both are good. I do feel, though, that in many companies there's too much emphasis on the quantitative because of what I would just call number fetishism. That people think, a number, that's valuable data, whereas insights into how people behave, that's just chit-chat or hearsay or whatever. But honestly, that's data too. Data is not just numbers. It doesn't have to have a confidence interval. Data can very often drive the product forward, more so if they're qualitative data, which are broader and richer than if they're quant. But that said, you shouldn't only do qualitative, because it's very good to have these more precise measurements as well. And the two methodologies, or two types of methodologies, if used in combination, they have really a great synergy effect, and you can truly much enhance your understanding of the user experience by combining the two. But not just by only chasing numbers. So what's more important? This elite type of design, by which I mean designing those few big products that are always in the press and everybody uses them, like the mobile phone platforms or your PC operating system, things like that a lot of people are doing. Or broad design, by which I mean designing a lot of individual products, of which there are millions in the world, and again, my answer for all of these things is the same, which is duality, which is both are important. But the elite design certainly has a lot of importance to it. Like, for example, right now, we are seeing kind of a split in the world between two different types of platforms being developed, and we might call it one world, two systems. And China is going to design probably like an entire new set of systems that's going to be a platform for billions of users by the end of the century. And so that's really important for those guys to really get it right. Well, now you may say, it's ridiculous for me to talk about billions of people by the end of the century, because who cares about the end of the century? I think we should care, because these type of infrastructure things tend to be very, very long-lasting. Many of the things that we use today in graphical user interfaces come from the original work like about 50 years ago or so in graphical user interfaces. Now, luckily, the guys who designed those things back then were very good, and so that's why we're not suffering so much under still using many of these things, but it is really, but they have very long-lasting effect. Actually, as an example, in the London Underground, the Circle Line was built about 150 years ago. And back then, they didn't have these boring machines that we use now, like humongous drills that just drill a tunnel under a city where you can put a train line. What they did, these Victorian-era engineers, they were can-do people. They had 10,000 men with shovels. And they dug up the streets of London, and then they put in a tunnel, and then they shovel back the soil on top of it and to cover it. And that's the London Underground, the first line, the Circle Line. And I've been writing the Circle Line, in recent years. And so 150 years later, we are still running that train in the line. And the exact path of that line is determined by which streets they could dig up in London 150 years ago. And so these things have very long-lasting impact. But that's, so on the one hand, very important. But on the other hand, I do think that ultimately much bigger value accrues from all of the many, many, many things that are more individual products. Millions, hundreds of millions of probably of user interface designs in the world combine to form much more of that user experience than the design of the phone or the design of your laptop. So I think that's where the more so cumulative UX value comes from, both in terms of user experience impact on humanity and also in terms of business impact of financial, economic value of that design work. And so as another analogy, let's think about electricity. So the elite design of electricity is to build power plants. And yes, power plants are very important. Without them, nothing comes out of the plug down here. So, we've got to have power plants. On the other hand, the true value of electricity comes from all the many things, like that light bulb and this projector and even this clicker, which uses very little electricity, But that's what allows me to forward the slides instead of having to walk all the way over there and click the button on the computer. Now I can click it here instead. And so that's a value add, right, that comes from having a little tiny bit of electricity sitting in the battery here. And so you add that up by millions of things that use electricity, hundreds of millions of things that use electricity, right? And the combined business value of all of those products, or the combined impact on people, is much more than the impact of the power plants, and yet we certainly can't do without the power plants either. So both are important. Now, how do we go about our process? Do we have the systematic approach that I was advocating in my book a while ago, I call the engineering approach, or do we have more of a hacking approach, putting it together, blah, 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 and just throw it at the wall and see what sticks? And I think that has become too much an approach in recent years of just almost random design and just throw it out and do a few things and we'll see if what the users like or not. And I really feel that leads very often to bad design, and in particular it really much leads to sort of spaghetti design, not a coherent user interface architecture, because it's not designed through. And it also leads to a lot of wasted effort and a lot of expense. It's when you do that kind of hacking approach, just throwing something out, inevitably you will find you'll have to change it. And it's about 100 times more expensive to change the user interface after it's shipping than it is if you change it while it's just a drawing on your notepad. You really want to have a more systematic approach, at least to the bigger type of projects. But that said, it is a duality, because I also recognize that in many cases where you don't want to follow the full process, many times you want to follow a scaled-back process. And sometimes you don't want to follow any process at all. And it's just a small project. You just got to get something out the door now. And these are all acceptable. There's an entire continuum there. But all that said, I do think that there's too much of the hacking approach these days, and I would like to see more of the systematic approach. What are the people we're targeting? So the OECD, which is basically all the rich countries in the world, did a big study of the computer skills in the workforce, and this is their basic finding, is that across the rich countries, 5% of the users are what we might call power users, people who are able to do advanced tasks with computers, people who are actually truly empowered and that they can make a computer do what they want it to do. They can combine features to accomplish something that's not an individual feature. On the other hand, 69%, which is basically 2/3, are low-end users who can hardly do anything with a computer. They can just react to what the computer is showing them. So they can do things like scroll through a timeline and click the like button if they see something, but once it scrolls off the screen, they have no clue on how to get it back. So that's the vast majority. And so this 5% power users, that's both the average for all the rich countries, and it's also the specific value for the United States as well. So that's 5%, that's honestly not very much. And then there's some people in the middle, of course, who can do some things, but not really advanced things. So given this data, and it's really solid, it was a very, very thousands upon thousands of people studied in many, many countries with basically the same result in every country. A few percent up and down, but the basic conclusion the same. Given that, what should we target? Well, the numbers really, this is where quantitative data comes in handy, right? Because the numbers speak a very clear message here. The 69%, that's what we should mainly target. I actually think it's a disgrace that 2/3 of the people can't really use computers other than what's being shown to them. So if the goal is empower people to use, to be in charge of technology, we've got to fix that. We've got to make computers that are suitable for normal average people. Not just for people like ourselves, because I bet you everybody in this room is probably among those 5%. And this is one of the oldest lessons we have in usability, is you are not the user. So the vast majority of people have a much harder time with computers, and we do need to fix that. That's a serious, serious problem we've got to look at. On the other hand, I don't think, again, dualities, it's not the only thing. We shouldn't abandon or forget about the power users, because they are often people who have very important jobs, make very high value decisions, and they are quite poorly supported, actually, by current computer technology. It's not well suited for doing advanced things, advanced decision making or understanding large amounts of data. We don't really have great support for that in current computers either. So we also need to focus resources on designing better for the power users and getting them true power, not just the miserly power they have right now. And so by way of another analogy, let's think about Opera. So Opera, I don't actually know the exact percentage, whether it's 5% or whatever, but it's surely a small percentage of the population who goes and to the Opera. And that's, generally speaking, not a big problem, except for the opera companies. But a very small percentage of people go to Opera. Now, we could donate or give a ticket to the broad masses and force them to go and sit in the opera house for an entire evening of Wagner, and they're not going to like it. Because Wagner is the composer who gave a rise to this expression, it's not over till the fat lady sings, and she doesn't sing until very late in the evening, because they have very long operas. So the vast majority of people, you just can't get them to like opera. Now, so therefore, we have pop music, right? So we have another type of music that many, many more people like. Now, what I would say is a shame would be if we only had pop music. I think it's good we also have other types of music that maybe don't appeal to so many people, but for the people who do like to go and sit for 3 hours and listen to a more complex piece of music, I think it's good to have. So it's not like only one or only the other, but rather they can be many different things. So I've talked about a variety of different ways in which there's a duality of multiple two different things to consider in user experience. And I think if we kind of revisit that list, we can almost like make sort of a random generator of new keynotes for every single UX conference for the next many years. So here's a list of some of them. And let's just throw darts at this screen. And so maybe this is an example, right? So we say, well, we should emphasize surface design because it's got to be beautiful. On the other hand, UX is actually secondary to business because it's going to be zero user interfaces, and productivity is the thing to emphasize, not this frivolous time pass stuff. So that would be one great keynote. Take a strong stand, okay? That's usually what they do in these type of speeches, and so I'm like the exception here because they, well, you gotta do both. Well, we could do exactly opposite speech, right? Well, deep design is what really is important, and because UX is very important to business, it's everywhere. And we should also now consider this time pass, which will be a much larger part of the economy and much larger part of user computer in the future. So I can make either speech, and it's going to sound very compelling and convincing, hopefully, and I could throw some other darts and get another speech. But what really is my true message here tonight is that that's not really valid, because these things are dualities. There are both sides to those coins, and there are quite a lot of these coins, right, and I've gone over in this speech. And so UX has these many, many aspects where you cannot just take a simple, strong stand, but rather you got to consider stand on both legs, so to speak. You've got to consider both. So let me give you an example from sculpture, since we started out with paintings. So here's a sculpture of a Greek warrior named Philopoemen, and he was in a battle in the year 222 BC. And this statue was made about 2,000 years later, so it probably doesn't look anywhere like him. And in particular, I sincerely doubt he would go into battle naked, except for one strategically placed strap. So let's just consider this not as historical documentation, but rather as an artistic expression. And I do think this is a great artistic expression of a strong, powerful warrior. I mean, he looks strong, he looks determined, he looks like you don't want to get on his wrong side because you're going to lose. So that's if you look at the statue from this angle. Well, let's take a few steps to the left and look at the statue from the other angle. Now we see he got a spear, javelin, through his thigh in the battle. And then he pulled it out. Ouch, I just say, ouch. He pulled it out and then he kept fighting. And so that's why he's famous. And so we look at the statue from this other angle, we see now a wounded warrior. So now, which is true? Well, both are true. He's a powerful warrior who got wounded. And that, of course, happens in the battle, right? So the sculpture has this advantage that the paintings don't have, that they can show us multiple perspectives as we walk around the sculpture. And so that, I think, is actually even the best analogy for user experience, because it has all these things in it at the same time. And depending on how we look at it, we can see the different perspectives. So because we have to have these multiple perspectives all kind of active, or all something that we need to think about, you know, that's why UX is hard. There's not a simple answer. Right? Now, so that's in one way my conclusion on the talk, but I can't just leave you with a slide that says UX is hard. So there's actually another perspective, duality. UX is easy, because for any given project, we don't need to consider all the complexities of the entire concept of user experience and the field and the history and the blah, blah. No, for any one project, there we do take a stand. Okay, now we're going to emphasize this method, we're going to target this audience, just make your decisions, your choices, and now we know what to do. Just remember that for your next project, these same the choices might be different, because there are these complexities underlying it. But for any one thing, you can make your choices. And this is one of the kind of true characteristics of like a true professional, true UX seasoned professional, is that you know when to do what, and you can choose, and you don't have to ponder everything all the time, and you can never get anything done because there are so many things to worry about. No, make your choice, and then you go there. And if we do that, well then, yeah, it says UX is easy, and that's how we make our progress. Thank you very much.